There are so many memorable stories of Jesus. We see him captivating large crowds with his profound wisdom and teaching. We also see him performing many miracles and healings for individuals from all walks of life. Jesus' impact on his community was unmatched. But it was Jesus' discipleship of those closest to him which produced his greatest and most lasting impact. In those days, it was common for a rabbi to have a group of disciples. The expected relationship between disciples and their rabbi was referred to as Shemush Chachamim, which is Hebrew for servant of the rabbis. A disciple was expected to submit himself to his teacher's wisdom and also become like a servant, performing all kinds of menial tasks for his master. However, Jesus flipped this model of discipleship around. Even though he was master and teacher, he taught his disciples in word and deed that the way to greatest impact was not through exerting authority over others, but by laying aside personal aspirations to become their servant. It took them 3 years, but slowly the disciples began to understand that following Jesus was not the path to greatness and significance, but rather to personal sacrifice and servanthood. While this had a profound impact on all the disciples, perhaps none felt it more than Peter. Despite repeated failures, Jesus never gave up on him. But it was Jesus' ultimate act of servanthood and sacrifice on the cross that forever changed his view of leadership and how far one should be willing to go for the sake of another. Peter's life became a powerful, living example to the redemption that was available through Jesus Christ. As an eyewitness to all the teachings, the miracles, the transfiguration, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus, Peter spent his life proclaiming the good news of Christ's kingdom and becoming a servant to others the way Jesus served him. Through the proclamations of Peter and the other disciples, thousands of people came to believe. Early on, a young Jewish man named John, or Mark as he is more commonly known, joined the community of believers. Expectations for Mark were high as his cousin Barnabas had already become a distinguished leader in the early Christian community. Perhaps because of these high expectations, Mark's failures seem extra noteworthy. He abandoned Paul and Barnabas early into their first missionary journey, which damaged his reputation among some within the community. However, our failures do not define us, which is something the Apostle Peter knew well. Perhaps in Mark, Peter saw similarities to his younger self. He recognized Mark's need for someone to walk patiently alongside him and cultivate his strengths, just like Jesus had done for him so many years earlier. So, Peter took Mark under his wing, carefully instructed him, and worked tirelessly to cultivate his growth in Christ. He invited Mark to accompany him on his journeys. Wherever Peter went, people gathered around to listen to his stories and experiences with Jesus. He spoke of the many healings and miracles that testified to Jesus' identity as the promised Messiah and Son of God. He expressed his intense grief over his fear and denial of Jesus just before his crucifixion. And, as an eyewitness to the empty tomb and risen Jesus, he boldly proclaimed Jesus' physical resurrection. All the while, Mark absorbed the words and actions of his spiritual mentor, perhaps at times even serving as his translator. Meanwhile, a thriving Christian community was established right in the imperial city of Rome. Despite their vitality, they sensed that they were not immune from the persecution faced by Christians in other regions. There was a growing realization that, at any time, violence against Christ followers could break out in Rome as it had in so many other cities. Both Peter and Mark had a history of fleeing in the face of danger. But, over the years, both of them had grown in their understanding that following Jesus often demands sacrifice. This time, instead of fleeing for fear of persecution, they boldly headed straight into the perilous situation in Rome. As they had done so many times before, Peter shared his first-hand accounts of Jesus, while Mark stood by his side. Together, they served the needs of the Christians there and strengthened them to be imitators of Christ, even if it meant sharing in his suffering. It was around then that Mark realized the time was drawing near when Peter and the rest of the eyewitnesses of Jesus would no longer be around to share these testimonies. He also knew that, as Peter's longtime partner, he had become one of the people most familiar with Peter's stories. An early church father named Papias, writing not long after the events of the first century, tells us that Mark accurately wrote down all that he remembered of Peter's stories of Jesus and preserved them in the Gospel of Mark. So in a sense, when we read Mark's Gospel, it is as close as we can get to listening to Peter himself tell us his stories of Jesus. Every time Peter retold these stories, he got to relive these precious moments. His life became a reflection of his rabbi. Like Jesus, he did not expect to be served, but instead lowered himself to be a servant of others. In imitating this example, Peter touched many lives, ultimately sacrificing his own life for the sake of strengthening others. Like Peter, we are also Christ's disciples. And like Peter, when we imitate this example of Jesus, we apply the Mark effect.
If you found this video helpful and would like to see more content like this, please consider donating on our website. Also, please like the video, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.